I'll just borrow from Red Skelton. Well, thank you. Good night. All right. Let's, wow. Thank you so much. First off, thank you because I know that for the invited speaker talks, that's two talks that you are giving up from other people to listen to me speak. That's both humbling and gratifying, and I want to say thank you for giving me your time and attention, and I will give my best to be able to do that for you as well, so that you walk away with something that is worthwhile for your time. A little bit about me real quick. As was mentioned, my name is Michael Larsen. I've been involved in software testing for almost 27 years, something to that effect. Before I was a software tester, I was a musician. And actually, I am a musician today, but I took a very long hiatus between the bands that I left in 1993 and the band I joined again in 2015. So, but I'm not at all uncomfortable on a stage, but to be honest, everybody says, oh, do you ever get to that point to where you lose that butterfly in your stomach nervousness? The answer is no. I always feel it, and I welcome it, because if the day comes that I get on stage and I don't feel that, it's time to hang everything up, because there's no point in saying anymore. I'm dead inside at that point. Okay, so let's start with the topic of this discussion, future-proof your software. Actually, I can't edit it, but I want you all to do me a favor, especially in your presentation parts. Where it says the software, I want you to write a nice big asterisk next to it. Because I'm not actually here to talk about how to future-proof your code. Well, kind of. Actually, I am, but I'm doing it from a different perspective. And that different perspective is, I'm talking about future-proofing your software for a very specific purpose. And that very specific purpose is each and every one of you. Software, when it is developed, for better or for worse, it is developed by people who are like us. We develop software because it fills a need. Usually it fills a need that we have. And for better or for worse, most software companies tend to be, with some exceptions, but mostly they're kind of, that whole culture fit. They're, sort of in the same age range. They have sort of the same capabilities. They have the same coding skills. And also, in many cases, they are what we refer to as normative across the board. Normative in the sense of how they see. Normative in the sense of how they hear, how they handle things, how they move, how they think. And when you design software in that fashion for yourself, you introduce a lot of biases. And those biases are oftentimes very much unintentional. Okay? So the point that I'm trying to make here, of course, is I can't tell you what software is going to be like 20 years from now, but I can give you a pretty good idea of what I'm going to be like 20 years from now and what that's going to entail. And the fact of the matter is, if we are lucky enough, every one of us is going to deal with the effects of aging. So just to give you an example of how many people over the age of 60 we're going to be dealing with come to, this is projected out. So right now, if you look at just before 2020, there's going to be 1 billion people on this planet who are over the age of 60 by 2020. And by the time we get to 2050, it's going to be 2 billion people out of a projected 10 billion by 2050. So that's 20% of the population is going to be over the age of 60. And most of those people have grown up in the digital age. They've grown up with the idea of being able to use technology to their advantage. And they want to keep using technology to their advantage. So a couple of statistics to throw at you. Baby boomers first reached standard retirement age in 2011. Just let that sink in for a second. And on average, 10,000 baby boomers retire every day. And that wave is going to continue at that rate for the next 11 years. This is the one that's more sobering to me. Generation X is going to see their first age 65 retirees in 10 years. I'm part of Generation X, and that hurts to see. But that's the fact. When we're aging, that's what time does to us. Time doesn't stop, time doesn't care, time's not fashion conscious. It just goes. And because it just goes, unless something takes us out of the game before that, and frankly, I'm not wishing that on anybody, just want to make that clear. I really do not want to, I'm going to show my age here, but air quotes. How many people here remember or are familiar with the movie Logan's Run? Oh, good. There's a few of you here. There's also a few here who don't know what this is, so this will make sense. I'm not going to spoil it for you, although I don't know. Is 45 years a bit beyond the time that you can spoil something? I don't know. The point being, Logan's Run is set in a future to where youth is worshipped, to where everything about youth is considered wonderful, positive. They've technologically made it everything so that you don't ever suffer the effects of aging. But it comes at a cost. And that cost is, at the age of 30, you have to go through a renewal ceremony. And for those who've not seen the movie, it's pretty kitschy. It's early 70s stuff, but you know, it's kind of fun. The whole idea is that people are brought into this big auditorium and they are, for all practical purposes, destroyed, with the idea that those people will be reborn as these brand new infants, and they will, again, get to repeat that cycle. As I said, no spoilers. If you want to go check out the plot and how it ends, go ahead and do so. Here's a little hint, though. Yeah, there's no reincarnation involved. Those 30-year-olds that are killed, they're killed. Sorry. Hate to spoil that for you, but point being, we don't have that right now, and it's a very good chance that we're not going to have anything remotely like that in our lifetimes. So how do we deal with it? Simple fact is, we're living at an age now where a high number of active digital users are going to find interacting with their devices more challenging if they're not already having problems with it. You don't have to actually answer, but I'm going to guess there's probably a fair number of you in this room that are under the age of 45. I'll just leave it there. And I'm not going to ask anybody to volunteer if they're over it, but if they start laughing at my next point, they'll pretty much guarantee my point. At the age of 45, generally speaking, you get to have what's called the gift that keeps on giving. These. Thank you for laughing. Almost invariably, some of you are going to have it earlier. Some of you, if you're luckier, will get it a little bit later, but everybody's going to get this situation. I know there's a more technical term for it. I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor. My dad told it to me some years ago, and I completely spaced and forgot what it is. But basically what happens to us, and the reason why this becomes necessary, is there's a condition called vitreal hardening. Your vitreous humor in your eyes, through most of your life, it's nice and spongy and squishy. That's why when you can squint to a certain point, you can make something into really sharp focus. Up to a point. At or around the age of 45, that vitreous humor has hardened to a point to where it's no longer very flexible. So you can't really squish that eyeball anymore. You can't get the light to hit the retina in just the right spot unless you put on a little bit of help. And that's the first thing that most people notice, and that's when accessibility, advocacy, actually steps into people's reality. And it's exactly how it stepped into mine. I was literally the year that I turned 45, I was asked to participate in an accessibility audit for Socialtext. And we sat through that and we got all this information back, and it was a fairly big backlog of issues that we would need to fix if we wanted to make our product available, to be considered an accessible product. And there was a very big reason why we wanted to make that product accessible. We wanted to make that product accessible because a United States government agency wanted to buy a lot of it. And guess what, gang? That's usually what it takes for accessibility to be taken seriously in most companies. Is either somebody really wants to buy it, and a whole lot of it, but you don't meet these requirements, so we can't. Or the other less pleasant approach is somebody decides that you are in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 508, and they sue your company. And guess what? That's what happened to Target a few years ago, which you might have heard about on the news. And they went to great pains to make their, not just their stores and their facilities accessible, but making their site accessible as well. That's what drove it. And very often that is the driving force. The driving force is, oh, we're going to get in trouble and it's going to cost us money. Or, oh, we got the chance of making a tremendous amount of money, but we don't have this. Either way, you're kind of starting from a negative. You're starting from the idea of, if we don't do this, we're going to be in trouble. What we instead should do, in my very humble opinion, or not so humble opinion, is why would we not want to make our products usable, enjoyable, and accessible to the broadest number of people possible? Seems like a very reasonable approach in my mind. So what are some issues that you're going to be facing as you get older? Vision, and yes, by the way, I put these up in very big type on purpose so that I could actually read it without these. So as I said before, yes, I jumped ahead on this. General need for reading around age 45, reduced ability to determine contrast and distinguish colors. Yes, you can actually develop what's called age-related color blindness or color deficiency. You will find dealing issues with mobility, arthritis, and other physical conditions. Parkinson's disease can definitely make it very challenging to perform fine motor tasks. Oh yes, I'm familiar with this one, and I didn't even have to age for this one. 10 years in the rock and roll world with pushing a 10,000 watt PA system with your voice in front of rooms of 500 people. I have about 20% hearing loss, and it's okay, I earned it. But it hadn't bothered me until more recently, in the sense that, and I'm actually very fortunate. For me, it's a cap. It's not so bad. As long as I can put a pair of headphones on and adjust the volume, it's tolerable. I have bandmates of mine, however, that have a much worse condition, and it's really, really frustrating. It's called tinnitus. And for those of you who have never experienced tinnitus, be thankful. But if you've ever been to a concert and you've not worn hearing protection and you've had your ears blasted for 3 or 4 hours and you've walked out and you've had that ringing in your ears, that high-pitched squeal that just doesn't go away for a few hours. Now imagine having that all the time. That's what tinnitus is like, and it's no fun. And there's another condition that also is more frustrating because it also affects your balance, and it also affects other aspects of how you interact, and that's Meniere's disease. That's a condition that develops more often in people that are in their 60s or older, but some performers that I know are actually dealing with this. For those who, I'm not showing my age, but back when I was younger, there was a very popular kind of frat rock band called Huey Lewis and the News. Recognition? Recognition? Oh, good, okay. They're from the Bay Area, so I got to give props to my local Marin boys. But Huey Lewis is no longer performing because he is dealing with Meniere's disease. And it is causing difficulty with him focusing, difficulty with him actually singing causes him challenges in his balance, and the ringing in his ears never stops. Cognitive issues definitely jump up as we get older. Alzheimer's disease, diminished short-term memory, distractions are very much of a challenge. It's harder for us to multitask, way harder. And focusing on complex tasks gets to be more difficult as you get older. This is just a fact of life. So how we've discussed this previously and usually is we've talked about accessibility. And that's probably a term that more people are familiar with. Now there's 2 points to this talk. One of them is accessibility, and the other one is inclusive design. My guess is that more of you have heard the first term than have heard the second term. Does that seem fair? Cool. So accessibility, to put it simply, means we are going to make this product as usable as possible for you so that your external software, hardware, whatever, can interact with it to help you achieve your objective. That is what accessibility is. In other words, when you use a screen reader, when you use closed captioning, when you are dealing with heavy-duty magnification to be able to blow text up so that you can see or get around macular degeneration, for example, that's accessibility. You are using a product in addition to the software that you are interacting with so that you can meet your objective. How is inclusive design different? On the surface, not very, except for one fundamental difference. Inclusive design wants to be able to do the same thing for as many people as possible. The difference is we want to be able to do it so that you don't have to actually have assistive technology. So when you hear about inclusive design, what we're saying is we want to make this product as usable by as many people as humanly possible in as many areas as humanly possible without having to rely on extra stuff. Now, for some people, there's only so far that inclusive design will take you. You will need to use assistive technology. If you are completely blind, a screen reader is a must. If you cannot hear, you will need closed captioning. But for many of those in-between areas, there's a lot that we can do that doesn't require a complete overhaul of our software. So one of the things that we want to be able to talk about and feel more comfortable about is the term disability. And as you age, much as I hate to say it, you are going to deal with a level, it's going to be on a spectrum, but you will be dealing with a level of disability in some point. Me not being able to read something right in front of me like this is a primary disability. I can deal with it, I can adjust to it a bit, but at some point, this might not work for me. I might have to do something else. If I were to break my leg and I were to be bedridden it would be very much a primary disability, albeit a temporary one. But mobility speaking, I would be disabled. And so a primary disability is something that is persistent or that is going to be long-term or is acute enough for a long enough period that you can't get around it. Now, there's a second level of disabilities, and those are called situational. And situational disabilities can pop up at any moment. So again, let's take that concert example that I was saying before. You're out there rocking with 40,000 of your best friends in front of a massive sound system playing at 130 decibels, and you get a phone call. How effective are you going to be in being able to hold that conversation? You're situationally disabled at that moment. You can't, it's a weird way of thinking about it, but that's actually the truth. And it helps you start to consider this. Oh, I can't hear now. This device in this capacity is useless. Here's where texting would be really brilliant, right? Why are you calling me? I'm at a concert. Text me. Fairly simple solution. All right. Question, how many people here have had traumatic experiences building something from IKEA? Come on, show me those hands. I know there's more of you. Come on, admit it. Yes. Now, you might be wondering, so I'm saying IKEA gets it. And I'm putting this example of their instructions, which I'm sure that many of us have struggled through or tried to figure out and scratched our heads and, what is this? But when I say IKEA gets it, come on, what does IKEA get? Sorry. Easy to understand pictures. More to the point, what's not on this? Words. It is language, thank you, that's the word, that's what I was looking for. It is language independent. You don't have to speak English to look at this.
Except to a blind person.
And that's where inclusive design has its limits. But yes. Outside of that, we could also probably talk about mobility challenged as well. You might not be able to assemble it by yourself. But at least from an understanding perspective, IKEA gets it, and they get it for an economic reason. By being able to design their instructions to have the minimal necessary words and to be able to convey their meaning in as broad a way as possible, in most cases, their instructions to assemble something is one page. And that's very deliberate. Now, what would happen if this page had to be replicated 30, 60 times to meet all the language requirements? Or even not that, just 30 to 60 times, but you now had a limited ship for where your product could go. So, we had to pack the German instructions with this one, so that can only go to German-speaking countries. Oh, this has the English, that's got to go here. Japanese, here. So by creating an instruction sheet that has almost no necessary communication requirements other than the visual pictures themselves, this is nearly universal. Almost anybody can look at this and make sense of it. I'm vacillating on that last point. Yeah. But for the most part, that's their goal. And I will give them that. They do a good job on their goal. So a book came out about 10 years ago called How to Make Accessible Websites, available from, I don't know if it's still available from Pragmatic Publishing, but they're the ones who published it. It's written by a guy by the name of Jeremy Siddick. And the key takeaway from this book, other than just considering accessibility, is what he calls his 10 commandments or 10 principles of accessibility. And I'm going to go through each of those and we'll riff on them for a little bit. So number 1, avoid making assumptions about the physical, mental, and sensory abilities of your users whenever possible. This is where it becomes dangerous to have a group that all thinks and acts and looks the same design a product. Because we make assumptions as to what people can do, what's a readable type size, what's a reasonable interaction? How small of a device do you have to point to on your mobile phone to be able to actually execute a command? And yeah, as you get older, those assumptions kind of fly out the window. Number 2, your users' technologies are capable of sending and receiving text. That's the only thing you should ever consider that they can do. All the eye candy in the world may look fantastic, but if you cannot get the prime information and message and workflow to your users, it doesn't matter. At least for them, it certainly doesn't matter, because they can't accomplish their task. This is my personal favorite. Users, yes?
On the previous one, you said you must always be able to get the text, right?
Yes. Fair enough, but it also can communicate it in a different way. The point is, your users' technologies are capable of sending and receiving text. That's the key point that I want to say. That's about all you should be able to assume. You shouldn't be able to assume that it can receive graphics. You shouldn't assume that it should be able to receive sound. You shouldn't assume that you can speak into it or others. This is, again, this was written in 2007. There's probably a chance that there should be an addendum to this, but it's still a pretty good suggestion. Yes, sir? That is true. This is my personal favorite of all of these, and this is one I would like to encourage every developer to have tattooed on their foreheads. Users' time and technology belong to them. They don't belong to us. Never take control of either without a really good reason. All in agreement? Yes, thank you. So provide good text alternatives for any non-text content. Again, that instruction sheet, you're absolutely right. How do you communicate that to somebody who can't see? In that case, you can't. But in your software, you can. And we'll talk about some of the examples of how you can do that. Alt tags are a really good thing. There's a lot of other things you can do with it, but it's the bare minimum. If you are publishing a picture on your site and you've got like a 1966 Ford Mustang, and it's on, I don't know, Ventura Boulevard in Southern California, if you have an alt tag that just says car, that's not very helpful to that user. I mean, okay, great, I get it. It's a picture of a car. That's better than nothing. But if the alt tag says 1966 Mustang, flame red, parked on the side of Ventura Boulevard in, I don't know my LA, just work with me there. At least then I go, oh, okay, I can kind of get an idea what they're trying to convey here. And if you had sight previously, and it's compromised now, you can at least pull back in your memory bank and go, oh yeah, I remember what a 1966 Mustang looks like. Yeah, cool. Use widely available technologies to reach your audience. One of the things that I had to deal with was the fact that we had to focus on, and for a while there, we could only focus on making sure that our product was accessible to JAWS, which is a commercial screen reader, and it's not a cheap one. Usually a site license for JAWS runs anywhere from, depending on how much you're buying, $500 to $1,000 a seat. That's pretty pricey software. Nowadays, because of VoiceOver being in the MacBooks and also being in the I asterisk family of devices, and the fact that NVDA now is an open source version of a screen reader that's now available for Linux as well as for Windows, that barrier has been resolved, thankfully. But if you focus on giving the proprietary software, because their keystrokes are the ones that you're used to working with, and you don't take advantage of the free versions that are readily available, you're blocking people. You're not giving them a chance to actually utilize the product in a good way, and we want to be able to make sure you can do that. Use clear language to communicate your message. I'm going to show you a little bit of an example of an application in a bit, and I'm going to actually pick on myself, because I've been doing a live blog here this conference. We're going to see how well I actually live up to my own admonitions. Make your sites usable, searchable, and navigable. I actually lived with this one. We had a content menu in the Socialtext application. It had a little plus button. If you dropped down, it opened up and it had 3 little submenus. One of them was for all the workspaces that you had access to. One was for a watch list of documents, and the other one was your history. Absolutely easy to navigate if you had a mouse. Guess what? If you're a VoiceOver user or if you use screen readers, you don't use the mouse. You use the keyboard. And what I discovered was getting into those separate sections and actually navigating through them was torture. We had to re-architect the entire structure and give individual commands for each of those toolbars so that we could actually communicate how to get through them. At the end of the day, it made it a much easier to use product and a much more accessible product, but it was a nightmare to re-architect that. Had we done this from the very beginning, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as painful. Design your content for semantic meaning and maintain separation between content and presentation. HTML5 is now capable of doing this. You know what? Please, I beg you, step away from the div. Divs are overused, and they're really painful to parse for screen readers. In many cases, they ignore them. If you have options now. If you have a sidebar in a page, you can actually put a tag that says sidebar, end sidebar. And so when a screen reader says, oh, this is a sidebar to this main page, let's read it. So at least they understand the context for where it is. If it's an article, call it that. Don't try to reinvent the world and say, well, I'm going to make this button, and I'm going to do it in CSS, and I'm going to use the div so I can make this cool vector shading, and it's going to be this round-looking cylinder. We have a button class. Use it. Number 9, progressively enhance your basic content. Don't dump an accessibility change all at once, because you will confuse those users who most need the help, and you will probably also burn your developers out, especially if you have to do re-architecting. Incrementally make changes. Start small and build your way up to what you're going to do. Don't try to say, we're going to push 70 accessibility changes in one release. That's going to be so overwhelming that the customers you're trying to help, you're going to actually hinder them more than help them. Give them a chance to get used to what's in there and go, oh, hey, they're actually making this easier. And bless them, they're doing it slowly enough that I can learn what they're doing. Thanks, gang. And the last one is you encounter new web technologies and replace with this mobile, Internet of Things, new interfaces, etc., lots of them. Apply the same principles. And also, again, if you decide to take things out of a product, don't do it all at once. Do it gradually. So great. So, Michael, thanks so much. That's a great, wonderful list. Now, how can we practically do something about this? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Number 1, if you are doing anything with accessibility, or you have even the remotest interest in accessibility, get used to this site and these tools. It's strike that, reverse it, thank you. WAVE, or Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. It is at wave.webaim.org. You can either download an app that you can use, or you can just go to their website and put in a URL. Now, I will tell you, the downside to using their website and putting in a URL is you literally have to do it for every single page you want to look at. But the good news is, if you do that, you will actually be able to look and get a summary of what it is you're looking at and what your problems are. So when you see a green tag here, this means this is you actually doing something right. You see a yellow tag floating around up there, it's like, yeah, we could probably do something better about that. But if you see red tags, oh, hey, what's that all about? Let's take a look here. That's important. I want to figure that one out. For those of you who like living in the developer tools world, there's a neat little product called Axe. This is my personal favorite, and I use this quite often. In fact, I was having some fun, and I was actually using it on the PNSQC website today just to see how they were doing and what they might be able to do better. And I gotta actually tell you, PNSQC, you're doing a pretty good job. We'll talk. I'm not gonna call you on the carpet in front of all these people, but you're doing actually pretty good. There's a couple of little places for improvement. How many people here have actually dealt with a screen reader? There's a lot of people who don't have their hands up. There is a little demonstration I like to do, especially if you've got your laptops open. How many people here have MacBooks that are here and that are open? Okay. What I like to recommend everybody do is just, when they get this chance, open up their computer, open up VoiceOver, and go to a page you want to look at, and try to see if, just by hitting Tab and closing your eyes, you can make sense of what's going on that site. I guarantee you there are about 80% of the sites out there, especially rich internet application sites, that if you do that test, you will frustrate yourself in about 60 seconds, if not sooner. It's a really good example, and this is what I like to use. This is what I call taking persona testing and putting it on maximum. There's a few little tricks that I like to use when I'm doing this type of testing. And for those who are interested, and if you've got a little bit of coin to spend, I will actually recommend it because I think they're really neat tools. University of Cambridge, that one in the UK. Yes. has they are the ones that are probably the most responsible for leading the charge for inclusive design. In fact, they have developed what's called the Inclusive Design Toolkit. And the toolkit has two components. The first is visual, and the second is tactile, not tactical. Yeah. Visual in the sense that what you can do is they have these glasses that are little paper versions, and you can stack them so you can create a progressively diminishing ability to see. So that you can actually see how far, how many of the stacks of glasses do you have to put on until you are not able to see the component that you're working with. And you can actually use that because they're gauged in half points. So that you can say, oh, I put on 4 pairs of glasses and now I can't even see what's happening here. Well, that means that that's 2 points worth of indirection, and that helps you measure exactly what you're dealing with. Yes, you can download tools that allow you. I'm going to talk about one of them. But this is a much more personal experience because you're in that moment and you can actually, now when I move away from the screen, I can see what this is like. I can see how it feels to interact this way. And it's not fun. But the idea, again, VoiceOver, NVDA, JAWS, these type of tools that you can use are readily available, and I strongly encourage you, if you get the chance, take your software, turn off any screen. If your keyboard lights up, darken the keyboard. Walk into a closet if you need to, or a room where you can literally close everything, and just see if you can work with it. One of the examples also that we have is what's called a color contrast analyzer. This is a neat little plugin. You can get it in Chrome or Firefox. And the idea behind it is that you can gauge the contrast between your screens, and you can see how much appears. So in this case, you probably are looking and it looks a little bit blurry and you can't quite tell what's happening on the screen, and that's on purpose. This is a mask. And the idea is if your contrast is enough, then you will see the text peeking through the mask. If it's not, it's going to be opaque. You're not going to be able to see it. And if you can't see the text and you're aiming for a 7-to-1 ratio of contrast, you know you don't have it. And then you can start to look to see what it would take to actually do so, and it can give you some suggestions to say, you've got your text is in this like off gray and this background that's in this dark gray, but it's only about 3-to-1 contrast, which is okay for AA if you want that, but if you want to go the maximum to be able to say that you really meet all the requirements for contrast, then you're going to need to adjust your settings. And this is a tool that I actually enjoy using, although sometimes it hurts me to use it. How many people out here are familiar with the tool Hemingway? Oh, cool. I get to show you something new. Neat. All right. So if you go to Hemingway app, let's see. If I jump out of this, if I jump out, is it going to let me come back to it? Let's see. I have it actually loaded up. So for those who are, again, I don't believe in picking on people that aren't here to defend themselves. So if I'm going to pick on anybody, I'm going to pick on myself. So this is my blog. I'm actively live blogging these sessions, and I realize that I'm typing these things out as I'm hearing them. It's a stream of consciousness, and anybody who's familiar with my blog knows that that's my MO. I go back and edit them later if I do it all, but pretty much everybody knows that, hey, if you're reading a live blog from me, it's probably full of mistakes. It's probably got run-on sentences. It's probably not the cleanest read in the world, but you are getting my unfiltered thoughts, for better or for worse. So what I decided to do is I said, let's take a little bit of the text from what I typed in for one of those, and let's see what Hemingway thinks about it. Hemingway's not happy with it at all. Oh, you're not? Oh, shoot, that's right.
Behind you, you'll see a different image.
Question, how do I do that if I'm no longer showing the...
You minimize it, you drag it over.
You mirror it.
Minimize it, drag it over, maximize it. Okay. Hold on a second.
Drag it over all the way to the left.
All right.
Or you mirror displays. Or you mirror the display.
Let's do that. That's fine. Thank you. Eh. All right, excellent. Well, that's not, it is not a testing conference if you don't have at least one technical difficulty. Thank you. Hold on a second. Let me set this. Should have an option for mirroring. How about now? Better? Let's see. Probably really. There we go. You see it now? Excellent. Okay, so this is Hemingway. And this is a very harsh taskmaster in regards to taking a look at your writing and telling you exactly what you can do to improve it. And so in this case, it's telling me that I have 3 of 9 sentences are very hard to read. 1 of 9 sentences is hard to read. 1 phrase has a simpler alternative. And 4 adverbs aim for 1 or fewer. And in addition to that, it also gives you a reading level. So it says grade 10, that's okay. Aim for grade 9. Now that's a standard that's been used in journalism, and it's been used in a number of mediums for trying to print out text. And we encourage to say if you can present anything at a 9th grade reading level, you're going to most likely get across to the maximum number of users. Now, this is a judgment call. There's going to be certain topics that no matter how hard you try, you are not going to be able to present it at a 9th grade reading level. And you just have to decide if that's okay. But in most cases, if you aim for grade 9, then you are doing pretty good. But yes, so Hemingway app is a neat little tool if you want to look to see what you can do to tighten up your writing and see how it actually plays. And if you can make it, the goal, of course, is if that block of text is clear and it has no highlighting on it, you're pretty good to go. All right, let's see if I can jump back to presentation now. And I'll take off mirroring real quick. All right, and back to, I may have to jump ahead. Let's see, did I have mirror on? All right, there we go. Thank you. All right, let's see, will it pick up where I left off? Please say yes. Yay, all right, fantastic. And one more that I will encourage you to take a look at on your own time, but it is definitely worth doing, is what's called the W3C before and after. It is a website that is set up without accessibility and with accessibility. And usually when I show this site to people, they all say the same thing. They say, well, I don't really notice all that much of a difference. And that's the point. The changes that we're making are not going to necessarily be visible to the average user. And this is good ammunition, by the way, because a lot of people say, I don't want to have to go into all the accessibility details and deal with the inclusive design principles. It's going to make my site look dull. I can't use any of the cool tools. It's not going to look good. And the answer, when I show them this, and they go, yeah, I don't notice any difference between the two sites. Exactly. Most of the stuff that you're dealing with is under the hood. Now, there are a few little things you can put in that you can make visible that would be definitely helpful, and I'll be talking about those in just a little bit. But I want to give an online example, and the reason I'm sharing these is because I actually talked to the companies about these, and I mentioned to them, it's like, hey, I just wanted to mention I've used your stuff in talks. Are you okay with it? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. So here's an app that I like to use. This is called Loselt. And it's a calorie tracking, activity tracking, food tracking, fill in the blank, whatever. And one of the things that they like to do is they like to be able to make as simple an interface as possible so that you can get the information you need without necessarily having to dig into multiple tables and try to deal with little tiny interaction points. They make them nice and big and visible. So in this case, you're looking at my nutrient breakdown for Wednesday, and plain and simple, I didn't get enough protein that day, but that's another point. What's nice about it, though, is that you can look at the pie chart. It's got pretty good contrast. However, for those who are colorblind, or who are dealing with issues of, of color differentiation issue, that light blue and that dark blue will blend together. And that will cause a problem. So that's an example of where you want to say, I wish that we could pick some colors that had a stronger contrast. That's an easy one that you can come back and say, these are definitely helpful, but there's not enough contrast between these colors. Can we pick some different options? That shouldn't be too difficult. Here's another example right here. It's just a dial, and it shows you exactly where you're at, and you don't have to actually count it. Even if you can't read what the text says, you get a pretty good indication of what's going on there. But even though, if you only get that indication, what else do you think could be improved about this? That's an open question. Throw back at me. Anything.
The light gray. The gray.
Yeah, the light gray, exactly. For some people, that's not even going to be visible. They won't be able to tell the difference between it. So a darker gray there would definitely be a plus. In the sense also, the green and the white, that could potentially blend together as well. I would say either boost up the contrast or somehow separate it. That's not the worst of their offenses, but yeah, you see can any of you tell that says Wednesday or Thursday there? Can you tell it says Friday, Saturday, Sunday? All right. So we jump over this. I also had a little chat with FitBit, and they said that they were okay to be pilloried as well. Bless their hearts. So again, another example here in the sense that nice clean interface, relatively easy to understand what's happening here. I would still fault them in the sense that their icons are too brightly colored. Not brightly, they're too lightly shaded. That if you are dealing with contrast issues, you're not going to see them. Those could be improved just by darkening them. And if there was just even a setting to say, hey, can I darken the icons? So that, okay, I get it. You have this nice, lean, cool-looking space-age interface. I want to be able to see the icons. Can I just make them black? That's a relatively easy adjustment that you can make in the settings. Give that to everybody, and they would be a whole lot happier with it. And another example right here on the FitBit dashboard. So, yeah, that's one factor. But notice you have yellow, orange, and red to show you the difference. I don't want to necessarily call anybody out, but if somebody has color differentiation in that spectrum, can you tell the difference? Yeah, there you go. You're not quite sure what you're looking at, and if you are struggling with looking at what the text size is and you can't figure it out, the colors don't help. Again, these are companies that actually have done a pretty good job with differentiation, but I'm just showing you that even with those who've made an effort at this, there's always room for improvement. So how can we start to think inclusively? Make sure the elements that appear on the screen appear on a printed page too. This is a test that I actually do very frequently with our product, and it's a nice way. I don't mean to say it's a nice way to embarrass our developers, but I'll go, hey, that's a really neat looking screen. Hold on a second. Control P, print. You know that 50% of this doesn't show up on a printed page? Whoops. Because for some people, they literally can't stare at a screen for an extended period of time. They need to take it offline. They need to either put it in a magnifier or otherwise just look at a piece of paper. That's still a reality in this digital world. We have to remember that. Simple interfaces are usable. Don't make it harder than it has to be. To that end, I give both FitBit and Loselt high props for that. They've made most of the interactions fairly straightforward and fairly intuitive. Again, always room for improvement. This is one that I think would be really neat, and if every web page and every app did this, this would be fantastic. Make it easy to resize text. Even if it was just a little slide bar that you could put on the front page of any app. Zip, and you can enhance the text as large or as small as you want to enhance it. Boom. If every app manufacturer did that, that alone would make up for a 70% improvement. I'm making that up, but I mean, it would be a huge improvement. 60% of all statistics are made up? Yes. Okay. Increase line space and paragraph space. So I'm guilty of this with my own blog. I do this a lot. If you ever present somebody who is dealing with autism or Asperger's and you just give them a wall of text to look at, it's overwhelming. And in many cases, they will just stop. They won't even try to work their way through it. If it makes sense, make spaces, break things up, break your paragraphs up. Even if you feel like, oh, this paragraph was only 3 sentences, it really doesn't make that, still, break it up if it makes sense to. Your readers will thank you. If you are using color to express meaning, put text with it too. Because again, as it's appearing here, on my screen, it's a nice solid green, solid yellow, solid red. Here it's very muted. And you might actually struggle with, oh wait, what is that? How am I, what does that mean? So by including text with it, you can actually say, okay, yeah, it's a pass. So lightish blue is pass. Okay, I can work with that. Maroon blue is fail. Well, at least I know it's a fail. Okay, cool. So where at all possible, if you're using and creating a CSS image, for example, to represent color, pop in another tag. Pop in a tag that says, here, I want to be able to include some text for context, for what it actually means. Explicit text in links. Unless you're trying to make a humorous point, there is actually there's a blog that I subscribe to, and I got what he was going for when he was writing it, but he was making a point to say, look, you know what? You can find this product all sorts of places. You can find it here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. You can even find it here, and here, and here. It's a cute joke if you are site capable, and you can read the whole thing in the context. Put that through a screen reader, and that's torture. Because what are they actually saying? And how much do you have to wade in? Well, usually they're explaining what the link is. Wait, there's 17 links, and they're all pointing to here. Oh, okay, yeah, I sort of get the joke, but that's a long delay for a punchline. If at all possible, and if it makes sense, go the extra mile. Even if your link is going to be half a line long, if it makes it so that it makes sense what the link actually is, do it. Your customers will thank you for it. And finally, there's a lot of neat little tools that we can use, and there are all sorts of coolness out there, but tools cannot make judgment calls. They can identify issues. They can tell you if something looks the way that it's supposed to based on criteria that you told it needs to look at. That's it. Tools can confirm that tags are present. What a tool cannot do, and the most important part is, if the question is, can an unsighted user experience this site to the same capacity and ability as a sighted user? No tool exists at this point that I'm aware of that can do that. All right, in summary. So the farther along we get down the road in development, the more difficult it's going to be able to make modifications to its design. If you're going to be talking inclusive design, you want to start as early as possible. You want to be able to make sure that you have the ability and the flexibility to be able to develop the things you want to put together. Inclusive design makes products that more people can use. It's usable by everybody. And it will also make last mile modifications for accessibility that much easier to implement. Easiest thing that we can all do, practice empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of your customer. Feel what it's like to be them. And even with that, I have to make this point, it only goes so far. Because at the end of the day, when our frustration level reaches its limit in certain things, we can stop. If I have the glove that limits my mobility, I can take it off. Our customers can't. And my key point is definitely think about the future, because you may be the one who most benefits from your design changes. Aging is a part of life that we're all going to face. If we take the time up front, we can actually future-proof our software for us so that we can maximize the benefits of it. And my last parting thought, just to make sure, can everybody read that okay? I will provide voiceover if it's necessary. But if not, I'll leave it there because, yeah, no truer words were ever said. Thank you so much for your time. Floor is open for any questions that you may have, and I think we're, how much we got?
Yeah, you have quite a bit of time. You have 20 minutes for questions.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I've got a question.
Okay, go for it.
As if you didn't know. So, nice presentation, and speaking from Socialtext web
Absolutely.
perspective. Probably remember I come out of a different world, and working in Internet of Things and those kinds of things, where the accessibility problem is going to be even greater than some of the things.
Absolutely. They're very tactile products.
Well, yeah, and so we're going to be going to things, you know, like voice, where people just talk to like Siri, but that's a problem.
Yep.
Many people's voices. Even things like working a touch screen, for some people becomes a problem. Galvanic skin response or something I don't know that happens in aging becomes an issue. You mentioned at one point good Parkinson's. My mom was a good computer user, but she got Parkinson's and got to the point where this was totally impossible. Even simple buttons were impossible. With voice, tried with voice, she, as people with Parkinson's will do, talk too slow. And the system, from an accessibility standpoint, could not adjust to that. So I'm wondering, is there anybody out there that you're aware of that's working on those kinds of things from an accessibility, industry standard kind of standpoint? There's obvious good things here in the web text world, but the world is much bigger.
This is true. So the question, so since for recording, let's make sure that we capture that, if I can encapsulate, it's that there is a broad range of potential issues relating to accessibility and inclusive design, and it's not just web pages and text and et cetera. There's, as we get more and more interfaces out there that we're going to be interacting with, we're going to have more and more challenges. And you're absolutely correct. We will. And are there companies out there that are working on this? There are a couple that I'm familiar with. I would definitely recommend taking a look at Tenon.io. One of the people that has been a big influence in my accessibility, field rushing, I guess you'd say, is Carl Groves. And he's a great person to talk to about that. If anybody knows about ways of dealing with that or is actively looking at them, Carl's probably the person to talk to. I would strongly suggest looking him up. Yes?
As I'm working for a public department in Germany, we have the problem of the barrier-free interfaces. And our biggest problem is to make the interface not unusable for not handicapped people. Because we do so much effort in making it barrier-free for all the people that sometimes people without handicaps cannot use it.
That's yeah. So, if I can, is that the question?
Yeah, how can I find the best way?
Okay, got it. So the question here is that in some cases, is it possible to over-engineer your product so that it is so accessible that normative users struggle to use it? And the answer is yes. Actually, that does happen. And ultimately, you do want to strike a balance. You do want to do the best that you can to design. And I would strongly suggest, if you are dealing with that issue, bring the WC3 before and after example up with whoever you're working with and show them. Go between the red and the green for each page and for each section. Open up the source and look at it and be able to see it. You'll see what's been implemented, and in some cases a fair amount has been implemented. But as far as the external user experience is concerned, they're almost identical. There's just little bits. If you go back and forth enough times, the pixels move just enough that you can tell there's a little difference. But on the whole, the idea should be that you can make a product that is accessible. You can make a product that is designed for as many people as possible, and that's really the goal. And that's why with inclusive design, that's that extra level of we're not just saying, hey, make this so that everybody that's out there can, can access it with their technology. Because if you do, at a certain point, you may find yourself in a situation where, yes, it is hard to use because you're trying to maximize for everybody at the last mile for that. And in some cases, it just doesn't make sense. So you do have to find a balance. And in some cases, you're probably not going to get a perfect across the board, hey, we have AAA WCAG compliance for everything. My guess is that a site that has that, you can go to all this effort, you can meet all the compliance details, you can meet the letter of the law, and your user experience can still be terrible. So, yes?
Thinking about maybe the ethical implications of the minimum viable product.
Okay.
So if you're building something, you just want to have it work, that is then your minimal viable product. Everything after that in agile mentality is extra. But in this case, it wouldn't be extra. It would be the things that actually make it usable for accessibility. So where does accessibility fall within development, in your opinion, in an agile development process?
Ideally or in reality?
Ideally and
Okay, so the question here is, when dealing with minimal viable product in Agile, it's getting the bare minimum necessary so that a feature can go out the door or can be pushed or accepted, fill in the blank. What is it that we need to do? How do we reconcile that? And where should accessibility fit with that? Now, in an ideal world, my answer is accessibility should fit at the very beginning of that. You should always design your product, even your minimal viable product, so that it at least meets a minimum standard of accessibility. And many of those minimum levels of accessibility are fairly simple to implement. There is no reason in the world that an image can't have an alt tag associated with it. Okay? Now, if you have an image that repeats itself because you're doing some kind of background cool masking thing, you don't want to have that, but you can null your background, and that's a design choice. So there are going to be points where you're going to say, you know what, I understand, we want to do accessibility for this, we want to make this inclusive design, but for right now, to be able to make it so that we can meet this milestone, I'm going to do these 3 things that meet the most important level of accessibility, and the rest we'll get to later, if at all. We'll see if it makes sense to do it. And sometimes that's as good as it's going to get, because you have to always make a business case for what you're doing. In an ideal world, we would all design products that would be usable by the maximum amount of people, but if there's no market for that, in your case, if you're designing something for internal to your company and nobody fits that criteria, are you going to spend that extra amount of time to do it? I'd say you probably wouldn't. And you probably wouldn't find anybody who would fault you for not doing that, even if ethically you should. So there are certain examples. I'll even take Socialtext as an example for this. We do our best to make all of our forward-facing customer pages as accessible as possible. Our administrative and our control panel pages, we don't. And that was a conscious decision, and we said we are okay with that. And various customers, when we said, what is your take on this? And they said, yep, we are okay with that as well. And so that was a judgment call that we very deliberately made and said, for anything that is in the administrative interface, yeah, we'll do our best effort for it. We're not going to completely just make it impossible, but we're not going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. We're not going to look for WCAG double or AAA compliance there. But if it's facing the customer, yeah, we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we're meeting to the best of our ability. And even then, at a certain point, you're going to face the law of diminishing returns. And you want to do everything for everybody, and it's going to cost you so much in time and attention and focus and testing that it's just not going to be worth it to do everything. But then that's where, again, the inclusive design principles come in, because our goal is to say we want to be able to do this for as many people as possible without making unique exceptions. We want to be able to design this in a way, we want to make our framework work in a way, we want our templates to already have that information so that we don't have to think about it. So if you happen to do that, if you happen to be able to construct a template for a page, it's already there. You don't even have to worry that it's going to be accessible because you already have it. And if it runs through your basic tests, you know that you've already got that covered. And then if you have to deal with something that's a little bit more esoteric later on, you deal with that on a case-by-case basis. Yes?
Just a comment. A lot of times, accessibility problems come in from people doing more than the minimum, so they'll rewrite the button or rewrite the text box and not realize that those features have features that they didn't think of or didn't realize were very important. So,
Right.
yeah, if you're going to do more than the minimum, maybe you need to think about.
And that goes back to the 10 principles that Jeremy had recommended. So the question is, it comes back to the over-engineering of a accessibility approach, and that by going all this extra mile and making it so that it's super compliant, it again makes it more difficult to use, or you're introducing complications that weren't there before and that you now have to be aware of. And that's real. It absolutely is something that you will find you have to deal with. And it takes time, and it takes a little bit of judgment and weighing what makes the most sense to do. But again, the theme here is, can you over-engineer your accessibility solution? You certainly can.
So, Michael, doesn't some of that really ultimately speak to the idea of building, quote, smarter systems where they should maybe self-configure themselves?
Yes.
Based upon what kind of user are you coming in as? I'm normal, and gives me a normal configuration, whereas it determines that Melissa here
Normal is so
is not
relative.
normal. She's a friend. But no, that's the idea of software, is the ability to configure
True.
and change itself, but it has to be made easy. So a lot of the configuration systems that are out there, I can't figure out how to configure them.
So let me repeat that back. So the idea being is that if we're moving towards smarter software systems, we should be able to allow either the software to figure out or customers to be able to configure software in a way that it works for them. And so if I'm a normal, put that in air quotes, user, then I get a normal configuration. If I have other details that I need to work with, I put that in and it accommodates me. Easily. Yeah. The biggest challenge with all of that is that word normal. Normal grades on a curve. Because what's normal to me might not be normal to you or to anybody else here. If we asked everybody for their definition of normal, we're probably going to get a whole bunch of different answers. So I would say probably more along the lines of the default. What is the default configuration? And how do we come to the conclusion of what that default configuration is? And if we all agree to that, then okay. Personally, I would like to see software that actually looks at the device's accessibility options that are already built into the device. So for example, if you've got an iPhone or an Android, there are already accessibility components that you can leverage and utilize. Take advantage of those. In other words, don't design your product in a way that you ignore that, or that you have to implement your own accessibility approach. If you've already got software that can allow you to do it, and it's already part of your system, then say, I'm handing this over to the accessibility part. Because again, that goes back to number three, of your customer's time and attention is theirs. It's not ours. So if we're going through and making this really awesome solution that they have to jump through hoops to figure out how to use, that's not helping them. If, however, we create our software to say, we're creating our templates, we're creating our structures, our functions, whatever, so that they talk with the accessibility control panel in the Android or the iPhone or our computers. And whatever gets set there reflects in our software. I think that's where we could do a much better job. And I think that that's where a lot of companies are moving. And again, that way, it puts the control in the hands of the customer. They only have to go to one place. They can decide what their accessibility settings are and to what level. And our software should be able to say, OK, take it. And we don't have to worry about it. That's the ideal. Are we there yet? Not even close. But I have hope. Question in the back.
Yes, our customers are demanding that our product be provided both English and Spanish, and
OK.
possibly Polish. So beyond the language translation, are there cultural accessibility?
Oh my, wow. I could give a whole different talk on that one. Yeah, so what you're talking about is you're talking about, so there's, in addition, because accessibility does also include a little bit of localization and internationalization, L10N, I18N, I think, whatever. I have to look it up. But yes, and so there are certain things that you can do toward that perspective. And again, a lot of it also comes down to, there's two different terms. One of them is using a language for a product, and the other one, which is less talked about, is using the locale of a product. And I discovered this a few years ago when I was doing some of this testing, in the sense that, well, what's the difference between location or language and locale? Well, I got into this because I had to do two comparisons. One of them was continental French, and the other one was Canadian French. And I was looking at examples of the menus, and they looked totally different. And so I had to actually ask a few friends who spoke both, continental French as well as Canadian French, why are these worded this way? It says, oh, it's a dialect thing, but believe me, people in Canada are really picky about it. If you use this approach, they will scream at you. So the answer is yes. There are nuances of language, of how you present certain things, and it's not enough just to say in this, and this goes a little bit beyond what we're talking about here, but it's still in the ballpark, in the sense that as making it as effective as you can for as many users as you can, you do have to be aware of the fact that just translating it is not enough. There is an option that you can use, and it's a fairly simple one for inclusive design. You can use the lang equals whatever. And one of the cool things you can do is if you want to make sure that you're preserving the language intent of something, you can actually take that language tag and you can put it in line in your styles. So if, for example, you've got a chunk of text that you want to make sure doesn't lose itself in translation somewhere, you can change the locale for it. So if your document is primarily in English, but you have a quotation in there that is French-Canadian, you can highlight it as being French-Canadian, and then therefore when it goes through whatever filter it goes through, you don't lose it. It remains in French. Now you can take that and drop it into Google Translate to kind of get the gist of it, that's fine. But the point is your document isn't going to go from English to Japanese to Korean to Dutch back into English, and you lose something dramatic along the way where the meaning and the nuance is completely lost. Yeah, it's a great test, by the way. If you really want to see how well you structured your pages and if you're using locales, play Google Translate Telephone. It's a fun game. For anybody here, when I say Google Translate Telephone, do you not know what that means? Awesome. Yeah, just share another tool. Fun. So, Google Translate Telephone is you take a block of text. Maybe it starts in English or it starts in another language that you're familiar with. But you take that block of text and then you translate it into a language. And then you take that language that it translates to, move it over, and translate it into another language. Now take that content, move it over, translate it to another language. Continue as many times as you feel you want to. If you're masochistic, keep going. Now take that last batch of text, drop it in, convert it to English. My guess is that you're going to get a really interesting paragraph, not even remotely related to the one you started with. How do you prevent things like that? Is you take locale tags and you embed them in your documents so that at the least, if you are translating, you know where you're starting from. And so if somebody does go through multiple translations, like if you drop something into a translate, say, hey, would you like to translate this to English? It will translate the bulk text to English, but if something's been highlighted as a locale and an inline style, it will actually preserve it as such. So then you can decide, oh, okay, well, let me take a look at that. But at least you're doing it from the perspective of understanding where you are in the process. I hope that answered the question. What are you doing?
Any more questions? We have time for one or two more questions, but if not, Michael will be available.
Yes, absolutely.
All throughout the conference, and he's also giving a workshop
I am.
on Wednesday. What's the title of your workshop?
So the topic on my workshop is building a testing framework from scratch. It's another asterisk title in the sense that I'm going to be sharing some conversations about what a framework is, what a framework isn't, what goes into it, what are some considerations you have to make, and I'm going to give you actually a working model. At least I hope I'm going to give you a working model. I burned 30 disks for this very purpose so that we can get up and running fairly quickly, and we're going to play, and it's going to be fun.
Well, great, Michael. Thanks very much. Let's give Michael a hand.
Thank you.